represent the rest of the country, but I am just going to say this. They went from 1,100 kids a year in the adult system to 44 last year. From 1,100 to 44, their crime rate overall has not gone up, and these kids are staying out of the adult system because they're getting the age-appropriate services and interventions they need before becoming adults. Colorado still has a pretty low minimum age. They, again, changed the number of kids in the adult system. They totally restricted. No one under age 16 can be considered without a hearing. And it was a very limited number of charges. And they've dropped that down to under 10 kids a year now, automatically starting in the adult system when it used to be over 100. Here's you guys, so you can see where you sit in that. Oregon got rid of their Measure 11 last year, totally got rid of it. Now every child 15 or older, a judge can review it for a certain number of charges, but they got rid of their automatic transfer. Utah, again, just this year, greatly reduced it. It is only for murder and aggravated sexual assault that children 16 or older can even be considered in the adult system. And again, Washington State also dramatically narrowed the charges that are eligible. And if you see here, all of the states around you guys have already gotten the kids out of their adult system. So pre and post trial, these children are being housed in age appropriate facilities with trained officers in adolescent development, with mental health providers that are trained in adolescent development. They have contact visits with their families. They get free phone visits with their families. They get all of the IDEA and education requirements up to age 21. We designed separate facilities for kids because we recognized they had unique needs. So even though Nevada's doing a good job about getting education in their adult facility, down 23-1, just like anyone else in those facilities. So I think I'll take a pause and then answer your questions because I know I just threw a lot at you. But I think there's a real opportunity here for Nevada to continue on the work that you've actually already started. And I think it's common sense. And we just have to realize that,
95% of these kids will be home by the time they're 24. That is when we see the desistance curve drop, right? So kids stop engaging in delinquent behavior around 24 years old, right? When they age out of adolescence. And then the last thing I will say, I know I just said I'm going to finish, but I underscore what Mr. Chambers said. The racial and ethnic disparities of children who are not preserved their right to a childhood by the criminal justice is alarming. It is the most disparate point on the entire entry points on the entire home of care for juvenile justice. Nationally, we are talking about 88% of children sentenced as adults are Black and brown. 88%. You look at their self-report data of how they engage, what they are self-reporting their behavior to be, you see very little difference by race, ethnicity in their behaviors. This is about how we view these children, how we invest in support their families during crisis, and we have solutions on how to get better about serving all of our children. And as Mr. Chambers said, that healing and cultural practice is a big piece of those successful programs. So with that, I open it to questions.
So much for your presentation. And I would ask if you could send this screen to our committee policy analysts so it can become part of our meeting materials, that would be extremely helpful. And then listening to the conversation during this meeting and our last meeting, my career was in correctional law enforcement. While I worked with adult offenders, I often worked with adult offenders that had just recently left the juvenile system. And I think I just have to put it on the record. Our DAs, for the large majority of those that I interacted with that work in the juvenile justice system, are people who truly care about our children, and they're working within the confinements of the statutes that they're given. But they truly care about our kids. And I just want to make sure that that's out there so that they're not painted in a negative light today as we have this discussion, because they're not part of the discussion today. They may come up during public comment, I don't know, but I just want to put it out there. We have people that are working with our children as public defenders in the DA's office, in the public defender's office, that truly care about the children that they come in contact with. And yes, there are some improvements that we do need to make to our system so that it better treats on an individualized basis our children, no matter what race or creed that they are, but is a better system in addressing the needs of all of our children. And it does sadden me as an African-American woman that the number of children that we see being filed are children of color, and how we can combat that. So I just wanted to, on the record. Members, do you have any questions for either of these presenters?
I do, but I'll wait in case somebody else has one.
And Ms. Waldman, I also ask if you could speak directly to the Memorandum of Understanding and what that would say. And
Sure, and Ms. Mistrat could probably offer a little bit more clarity on some of those contracts, but we know that in both Washington and Oregon and a few other states, the main primary point of, how do we facilitate moving young people into the, retaining them in the juvenile justice system. When we had these conversations, there is, a cost associated, which is why, we decided to run with this study and see what the possibilities are. But the way that it's worked on states is the Department of Corrections enters into a memorandum of understanding with the juvenile institution, and also takes some of that funding, the fund that would be used to retain the kids in DOC, would be transferred over to the juvenile system. There's also in some states an arrangement where Ms. Mistrat spoke to this, but there is an arrangement where some correctional facility staff are on hand at the juvenile institution to handle, any kind of therapeutic interventions that might need to be DOC approved for whatever reason. So that is one, possible solution that could move forward regulatorily. I think, some states have authorized that, and it's been quite successful in making sure that youth get, the full spectrum of care that they need. Did you want to add something to that, Ms. Mistrat?
I would suppose the only other thing I would add to that is, as our, again, nationally, you guys, I'm actually not exactly sure of Nevada's numbers right now, but I know you've made so many adjustments in the way that there's kind of some static costs with running a facility. And again, and as our juvenile population numbers go down in juvenile detention, we have space for children that isn't actually going to cost a lot more than serving them that are there. So we have seen that run that way. And then we've got policy platform statements from the National Sheriff's Association, from the major cities chiefs of police, from the Correctional Juvenile Justice Association, all calling for jail removal, because you've got, in general, you have very few children in these adult facilities. And as Holly mentioned earlier, both between PREA and JJDPA federal law, they need a lot more. The costs become pretty high pretty quick. And so I would just say, this ends up being more a choice of, it ends up not costing as much as people think it costs, although I know it is very hard to wrap your head around that until you actually do it. But I can show you data after data after data in states that have done this, and their costs were not even a fraction. As a matter of fact, in Connecticut, their costs went down by $2 million after making this change. And I do want to point out to the Vice Chairman, thank you for, I was not trying to any way, shape, or form vilify the DAs. I was trying to articulate the fact that when these statutes exist that automatically exclude children from the adult system, that ties their hands too, right? If it's in a juvenile court and there is a certification hearing, also does give the DAs an opportunity to look at the full picture as well and make decisions that are based on something more than the crisis of the time between arrest and when they have to charge. So I agree with you.
Thank you. Senator Hannan, go.
Thank you. And I apologize. I just got called down to, I have to go down to another office for another meeting here. So I want to get this in real quick. Ms. Mistrett had mentioned that she doesn't know what the numbers are here. And I think in our last meeting, we were promised some numbers. Did we get any of those numbers, I think, from the DA's office? Because that's the things I recall that they were going to supply to us. Maybe Mr. Guinan knows.
Madam Chair, yeah, for the record, Patrick Guinan, Ms. Duffy did supply those numbers. I have a PDF. I think I sent it to the committee members, but I'll resend it right now for the members.
Thank you very much. I probably just missed it. I tried to go over everything yesterday and didn't get to everything. Thank you.
Yep, my pleasure, Mr. Chair.
Members, any other questions before we move on to the next presenter under agenda item 6? Okay, I am seeing none. So I thank you ladies for your presentation. It's always interesting and impactful and meaningful, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I'll just ask out because as we hear the next presenter, there may be questions for you all as well. So thank you. So with that, we will move on to the representatives from the Division of Child and Family Services.
Good evening, this is Ross Armstrong with the Division of Child and Family Services, and thank you for having this important conversation today. I don't have a presentation, and mostly is kind of a summary of some of the things we've heard before. I know there are also county representatives to talk about this topic from their point of view. So I would just start first by noting that, there's the legal authority, which has been talked about today, is important to keep in mind, including Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and then for us, all of our juvenile process is outlined in Title V of the Nevada Revised Statute, and then the adult process is outlined in Title 14 of the Nevada Revised Statute. I don't have confident MOU would be sufficient for us to meet the requirements of those federal oversight laws. And so I think a more robust statutory change would get us to the right place. There are 5 main factors, I think, when this committee is considering this policy change. The first would be location. Where would these youth be placed within the juvenile justice system? If we're talking about post-conviction, only one of our 3 facilities is physically, so only one of our 3 DCFS facilities has a fence around it. And so that would be Summit View Youth Center, and probably the only suitable facility for this type of youth. And then some questions about the staffing. So is it Nevada Department of Corrections folks that would come and operate that part of the facility, or would it be Division of Child and Family Services? Because it's at a juvenile facility, they would need to meet those PREA ratios of 1 to during the day and 1 to 16 at night, which is very different than the regular NDOC staffing ratios. How those would come into play, I think that our the folks in Lovelock do a great job with what they have. One of that we have is for our kids in DCFS custody, there's an incentive to go to school and to participate and engage in services because that will accelerate your return home. That is not the case for those that are convicted in the adult system. At least, you can get some time for good behavior and those types of credits. I know that the Lovelock folks experience just resistance to those youth wanting to go to school because in their mind, what's the point? I have a certain time I have to, so I don't want to engage in that. I'm just going to, essentially do my time. And then the funding piece, how that funding of services and staffing works. So some key things about the sight and sound separation that is in the JJDPA, the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, and then it's touched on in PREA, at least in adult facilities, is there are a number of factors that they would look at to determine that the 2 types of inmates are in 2 separate programs. And part of this, I think, really part of our struggle in tackling this population is that Nevada actually has no definition of a youthful inmate in terms of someone who is convicted in the adult system but is not of adult age. We don't have a structure around what that looks. I think that could be helpful as this committee considers NRS changes. I do think that there is a great. It's important to also note some of the differences in just governmental structure. So we heard about California. Let me back up a little bit. There are three main structures for juvenile justice services in the country. One is where the juvenile justice services are housed within the agency that does adult corrections. One is a totally independent type of agency. And then the third one is it can be housed in the Department of Health and Human Services. So California mirrors that first model where it's actually the Department of Corrections that runs juvenile justice. You may have noted that during the economic downturn in Canada, they're actually shutting all of their Department of Corrections facilities for juveniles and leaving it to the counties to address those needs. Oregon has an independent Oregon Youth Authority, a lot more flexibility and jurisdictional range there, as indicated in that chart. And then, of course, Nevada is housed within the Department of Health and Human Services. I think there are pros and cons to each of those structures, but they're important to keep in mind as we consider the issue of housing. And so, to summarize, I think it is a great idea to figure out how we can serve these youth best. I think, there are some that are sentenced for a short period and some that are a very long period. We would take probably different approaches to those two. But from our perspective, we would be happy to work with this committee's counsel on any sort of NRS change to make sure we're staying within the bounds of the JJDPA, PREA, and then our Title V and Title 14 within our NRS. So that is all I have. I think, I don't know, Chair, if you want to pass it to the county juvenile justice agencies, and then we can answer questions as a panel or however you want to go forward.
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to go ahead and pass it to our county, and then we can wrap up the questions at the end. So I believe we have Mr. Cervantes and Mr. Martin from Clark and Washoe County. If you could join us.
Good morning. Frank Cervantes, Director, Washoe County Juvenile Services. And I have with me.
Hi, good morning. Christina Coles, Division Director, Washoe County Juvenile Services. Liz Flores, Division Director for Juvenile Services over probation.
So great conversation. First of all, so the questions that was posed is, can the county juvenile detention facilities serve as a holding center for some of the youth that are in the Lovelock Correctional Center? And we've had this discussion, and I said this before, we had a Supreme Court subcommittee on juvenile justice that did a study on overarchingly blended sentencing. And part of that was regionalization of correctional beds for juveniles and the housing of offenders in the adult correctional system. And so the conversation, usually goes back to one of the predominant features of juvenile justice is this low risk, high risk concept. And so we try to really match the kids' levels of needs and risk. And the short-term detention center, at least speaking for Washoe County, is designed for young people who are pending further disposition in the juvenile system or awaiting transfer to another facility such as mental health or one of the state correctional facilities that Ross is authorizing. So, we've talked to both Jack and I've talked to Ross. In answering the big question, it has some problematic logistics to use the Jan Evans Juvenile Detention Center for long-term housing needs for youth that are placed out in Lovelock. We don't have the programming that's really set up for long-term housing, and it causes some issues because the kids that we have really good education, we have medical needs, and we can provide that to whoever's in the facility. Where we really run into a problem is the long-term program. Some of the youth that are being transitioned ultimately upon age majority into the correctional system don't have as much to lose. They have much more severe offenses. So really is how to blend that population with our current population. Now we can do that for short periods of time, and we do that now with youth who are pending the proceedings in the adult cert, and usually the public defender's office will file a motion to have those kids held here pending the resolution of their certification cases. And we can manage to do that because it's much more difficult for the sheriff's office to provide those services, as you previously discussed from your earlier panelist about educational services for youth. We can do that much more proficiently because that's our business. But longer term is where we run into the issues because our systems really weren't designed for that long-term care. And so I'm just going to leave it at that because I think the discussion will probably promote some questions. So if I can, at this point, I'd like to throw it down to Mr. Martin, Clark County.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, if you're there, start. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to share my thoughts today. My name is Jack Martin. I'm the director of the Clark County Department of Juvenile Justice Services down here in Las Vegas. The biggest issue, and I agree and I disagree. I'm always careful whenever we compare anything to California. Having left the California system after many, many years of working in it, there's a lot of different mechanisms there that weren't exactly shared transparently. I mean, the system in California can house children up to 24. That's not part of our world. Direct transfers or direct files and occasions have been kind of bled and bounced around in between, intermingling these conversations. They're two very separate processes that occur. The direct file is obviously something that we in juvenile justice have zero influence on now of any kind. That is murder, attempt murder, aggravated sexual assault. Those three, well, the big three, those are automatically direct filed. Those children have no jurisdictional. I might hold that child for one night or until their first hearing. Our average length of stay here in Clark County is 18 days. For an actual Clark County child, that's about 11 days. For a child in placement or pending going to the state, those numbers go up exponentially, which makes it about 18 days. In reading the documents that were submitted by the Nevada Department, their average length of stay is 299 days. There's about 14 youth, about 299 days. I'm going to assume the majority of those children are coming from Clark County. I'm not going to disagree the value of housing children with other children. I'm not even going to touch that because there's quantitative multitudes of research that have been done to demonstrate that it is. But I am always cautious whenever we talk about a state function and discussing it at the local level. There's a history of things being pushed further and further back to the county. I mean, right now we're watching it with DCFS limiting their beds at the state level of DCFS right now, which creates a backlog of children within the county system. So within our detention center on any given day, I've got between 12 children that are pending placement at the state. Now you've added another 14 children. So to say that there are no costs associated with it or very little costs, I disagree with that. I would love to have a deeper dive into those costs. I just don't believe that's a realistic expectation to say there are no costs. And then to say I'm leaving from an 18-bed average length of stay to 299. I have no vocational rehabilitation stuff here. I have no long-term. I don't have the mental health or clinical staff set up to establish long-term